All right. Hello, class. Welcome back to History 1301. This is also continuing chapter 3. Uh, as you've seen, my lectures are pretty fucking long, so hang on tight. I just get really into this stuff, so I really hope you guys are liking it. And I'm putting them on YouTube, so you can have like the closed captioning as well. It won't be as faithful as to what I say. But it captures more or less the general gist of what I do say. So there's that option there too. So let's continue with chapter 3. Excuse me. Earlier we talked about I went at length about talking about slavery, the origins of slavery in the North American British colonies. So we're talking about slavery taking root, the transition from slave society with slave to slave society in Virginia and the southern colonies, Carolina, for example. We talked about issues in Europe affecting the North American colonies as well. The creation of these middle colonies, right? Pennsylvania was one of them. Then Carolina was another we talked about. Then we talked about Virginia, it's older colony, and its transition as well from a society with slaves to slave society. And now let's talk about New England, what's going down in New England up in the north. So we're just focusing on the south right here. So far. So part 2 will focus on the north and then back and forth. So New England, what's going on? So New England, in the 1600s, right? In the 17th century here, in the mid 17th century, we're talking about 1660 to 1700s. This is what this chapter is all about. In 1775, there was this really, really bad Indian War. And there was a lot of consequences and changes that this war brought about, known as King Phillip's War. So, just like in Bacon's Rebellion, right, the ultimate underlying cause of that rebellion is the same here with King Philip's War, which is settlers decreasing encroachment on Native American lands. By the 1660s, Rhode Island, the colonies of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Plymouth, they all claimed the land that was occupied by the Wampanoags. And this was what Chief Massasoits. That was his tribe. And by 1671, 75, when this war broke out, his son of Massasoit, Metacom, or known by the settlers knew him as King Philip. He was a Native American named Metacom. Was the leader of the Wampanoags. And what happened here is that by 1671, basically, Native Americans would have this tactic of playing European powers off of each other. So for example, they would do trades with the French and with the British, and then let the British and the French fight it out, kill each other off, and then somehow go with the winner. Which that was what the Native Americans would do, like play the Europeans off each other. This so-called middle ground, this borderland between natives and Europeans. But by 1671, that middle ground was kind of not there. Right? At least for the Wampanoags, there were well, Massasoit, right? Metacom, basically King Phillip, had submitted to to Plymouth, had submitted to these colonies, right? And they were kind of like part of their colonies now, right? In a sense, had to submit to the rule of Plymouth. Right? There were certain Native Americans that were to keep their things, their tribes, but they were basically under the dominion of the rule of Plymouth colony. So King Phillip, Metacom, this guy, no longer able to play right European powers off each other, right? The colonies off each other. You know? So keep this in mind: the colonies were not all unified at this moment. The colonies would fight for each other for the Indian trade. So at this time, um, it was because I guess it was I think it was Plymouth. I'm thinking it's yes. I was like kind of had the hegemony there, had control of this area where this tribe was at. The tribe had no recourse to use another colony or another European power to play off each other for their own benefit. So knowing this, King Philip's Metacom, he prepared for war. He was like, you know what? I don't want to be like dependent on these British people. So he prepared for war, and he went to war. And in June 1675, King Philip's men attacked the Plymouth village of Swansea, and it just created this massive retaliation back and forth, right? This violent cycle of brutal retaliation. So the next year, the New Englanders attacked back. They pretty much wiped out entire villages of Native American non-combatants, right? Women, children, families, you know. And it was absolutely terrible war, super violent. For example, King Philip, his fate, his head ended up in a stake. That's how brutal it was, right? On both sides, right? Don't get me wrong. It was super brutal war on both sides. It took a heavy toll on both the Native Americans, the Wampanoags, and on New Englanders as well. So about 4,000 Indians died, many of starvation after New Englanders destroyed the cornfields on purpose. The war eliminated basically like the significant presence of Native Americans in this area. So now for sure settlers control this land. For about 2,000 English settlers that got killed total. About, 1 out of every 25 settlers was killed in this war. And Indians were able to push settlers within 20 miles of the coast. Attacked more than half of all New England's town. And in total burned about 1,200 homes, 1,200 homes. It took the region decades to build, man. Decades to rebuild. I mean, and there was like, it reverberated. Like this was a tremendous like shockwave, right? There was a lot of widows that were left over, orphans and stuff after this war. It was terrible for New England. King Philip's War. Even though they won, they technically won the war. It had long-lasting consequences for society, for New England society. So that's King Philip's War. So you have that going on, and then you have other stabilities, as with the French pushing over here in the, like I said, St. Lawrence River and the Mississippi River. You have the founding of Louisiana. Let's see. Biloxi was founded in 1699. New Orleans was founded in 1718. And soon after, Cahokia, Kaskaskia, there's other French forts and outposts down in where it is presently Louisiana now, right? And so these Great Lakes and this eastern shore of the Mississippi, was French. So you have that brewing on there. So you have King Philip's War happening in New England, and you have the French kind of going up here, encroaching, right? Uh, Stepping onto onto the British colonies over there. And then you have south there, St. Augustine in Florida. You have the Spanish Empire. And in order to avoid this, kind of like I like a buffer zone, right? The British and the Iroquois Confederacy created this so-called covenant chain, this peace treaty, right? This alliance, and it helped both the New Yorkers and the Iroquois. That's where the Iroquois were from, the New York area, right? That area. And it made Albany like a really important trade center for Indian fur and stuff. So that's what's going on here, right? So we have like this competition of these empires and this Indians, and you have over here New England, King Philip's War. I mean, it's still like a borderland, basically. Nobody has full control yet. And then on the other side of the Atlantic, going back to London in England, you have the so-called Glorious Revolution. Right? So you have turmoil in England as well. So you have all this instability going down in the colonies and in the metropole as well. Right, so in 1688, well, between 1688 and 1763, along also, besides the Glorious Revolution in England, you have England and France battling that out as well. But let's talk about the Glorious Revolution itself, because that really impacts the colonies. So you have all this instability going down everywhere, basically. Right? And in 1688, you have this long struggle between the domination of the English government, whether it's by Parliament or by the king, by the monarchy. The Glorious Revolution finally, how can I say it, establishes the domination, the hegemony of Parliament, namely parliamentary, parliamentary monarchy. Right? Parliamentary is, for once and all, in power. You still have a king, but it's Parliament who now has the power after the Glorious Revolution, so-called Glorious Revolution. And moreover, there's a secure Protestants to succeed in the throne. That's what's going on here. And long story short, what happens here is that you had like you have Charles and Stuart, the Stuart monarchs, James, Charles, and they get ousted by the Parliament. One gets beheaded. And Parliament is still afraid of popery, right? Being controlled by the Pope. Right? One of the things they do is that they're looking for a king, right? Who's going to be the right king? So they don't want, right, the Stuarts to continue. So they look abroad, basically. They bring in a Dutch nobleman, William of Orange, right, who's the husband of James Protestant's daughter Mary. So instead of going through the male heirs, they go through the daughters. And the daughter of James married this guy, William. He was a Dutch, he's Protestant. So their Parliament was like, aha, we find a way to secure Protestants into the throne of England. It's like instead of going through like James and his sons who are Catholic, let's go with his daughter who married this dude who's Protestant, who was a nobleman, right? He was the nobility. William of Orange. And they do that. They bring him in, right? William of Orange comes into England, to London, armed, right? And kind of fights. Well, not really fights. It's a glorious revolution. There's no bloodshed, really. So they instill, right? So Parliament gets this guy William of Orange, who's Dutch, and Mary, who's English, married together, right? And they bring him from. Where the fuck is he from? You know, where is it? Do I have it here? I don't. But they bring him away from abroad from England to be the king and queen of England now, in order to secure Protestantism on the throne. So that's the Glorious Revolution. So now you have kind of like a puppet, kind of like king, queen, and you have Parliament who really has the power. That's a Glorious Revolution. It was engineered by like this small group of aristocrats, in alliance with this very ambitious William of Orange, this Dutch prince. In Parliament then, in 1689, they enact the so-called English Bill of Rights, which gives Parliament powers of control over taxation and certain individual rights. So trial by jury, due process. So Parliament now has that, oversees that, right? Has power over that taxation and the civil rights. The Toleration Act they passed as well. They allow Protestants, dissenters, Puritans, or Quakers, for example, not Catholics though, to freely practice the religion. Right? So you kind of see like this right again, right? This kind of like liberalism here. This was liberalism kind of showing themselves. All right, but the effect of this glorious revolution on the colonies, it was also pretty big. Uh, so now the glorious revolution made it clear that Parliament, not this autocratic monarch, would henceforth be the leading role, the leading power in government. Um, and also forever, right? After what was it? Almost a century of religious wars, made Protestantism the religion of England. Right? This is what we call it creating the Anglo-American world. The Protestantism here now prevails. The Parliament, Protestantism prevails now after the Glorious Revolution. And like I said, this is, I mean, and this moment here, the Glorious Revolution, will be seen, right? Will be looked upon later on by the American colonies, by the North American colonies, as a model for constitutional government. It begins here with the Glorious Revolution. So John Locke, remember this guy, John Locke? He was secretary of Anthony Ashley Cooper, one of the proprietors of South Carolina. He was also a part of the Royal African Company and the Lord of Trades. So John Locke, right, in his two treatises of government, right, he asserts that human equality and universal rights, right, are supposed to be safeguarded by a government. That this human equality, these natural rights, that's what he calls it, natural rights, these universal rights, uh, are safeguarded by people that create a government themselves to protect those things. Namely, right? So this is how it goes, right? When people create governments, they give a little bit of their freedom up. They give the freedom up, and what do they get in exchange? In exchange, they get these rights, these natural rights, that are protected by the government to enjoy life. The purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, property. Basically, what John Locke said in his two treatises of the government. This is pretty radical, right? So what it's saying here now is that the power lies in not on some king who rules by divine right. This political theory here that is espoused by John Locke, saying that it's individuals. We elect, right? We create a government that's going to protect these certain rights in order for us to enjoy life. And then you know the rest, right? This is what the Constitution now says, right? It's based on this John Locke guy, who was a secretary of the proprietor of South Carolina. All right. I mean, also you had a lot of the Learner's Revolution also initiated a lot of like mini religious wars here in the colonies. So, for example, you have Cody's Rebellion. This was in 1689 in Maryland. There's a group led by John Cody, a militia officer. When he heard about the Glorious Revolution, right, he proclaimed loyalty to William and Mary, the new kings, right, William of Orange and Mary. And he tried to take away the government of Lord Baltimore, who was Catholic. Right? And he was successful, basically. I mean, in 1691, they took away Baltimore's proprietorship, and it became a royal colony again. In 1702, Maryland, who was supposed to be like a refuge for Catholics under Lord Baltimore, this guy, was the Anglican Church, right? The Church of England basically became state church. So that's Cody's Rebellion, and this was an effect of the Glorious Revolution of the colonies. Another effect of the Glorious Revolution of the colonies is Jacob Leisler's Rebellion. Poor guy, Leisler. Leisler's Rebellion was just German-born dude named Jacob Leisler, one of the wealthiest merchants in Maryland. Is it Maryland? It's in Maryland. Oh, New York. What are you talking about? Fucking in New York. Yes, he was from New York. Sorry, Jacob Leisler, and he was a fervent Calvinist, right? He was super Protestant, right? The old school Puritan Calvinist Protestant. And he feared, that James II was going to take over, and that he was going to reduce, right, what he says, to reduce the empire to popery, back to Catholic power. And so he tried to take over. He tried to seize, to reclaim local power. Basically, he was not willing, basically, to cede power to the new kings, to the appointees, to the new kings appointed. And basically, long story short, Leisler was not successful. He was captured. He was executed. He was quartered, actually. He was cut up in little pieces, 4 parts. And yeah, and this is all an effect of like the Glorious Revolution over here in England. And then people get the news over here and like, oh crap, I'm loyal to this faction or this other faction. So yeah, so there's all these tensions and instability going on here. And what you see also happening as well is how can I say it? These changes in society, these big changes in society. So again, right, this lifestyle was a fervent Calvinist, right? Puritans in New England, right? And there was like this rise towards like liberalism, towards more toleration of religion. It's one of the things that John Locke also espoused. Right? He's one of the Enlightenment figures. And so Enlightenment is about reason, not about like God or supernatural forces telling you how to live and stuff. It's your own individual capacity to reason. It's the Enlightenment. And Leisler was a Calvinist in New England, right? It's a perfect example here. I'm going to switch over now to the Salem witchcraft trials in Massachusetts. So you have all this instability happening. Fuck, a lot of instability. A lot of changes happening, right, in society. Right? And you have Indian wars. Right? You have the Glorious Revolution. You have these religious wars, right? These uprisings. You have Bacon's Rebellion, right? King Phillip's War. Right? You have Leicester's Rebellion. You have Cody's Rebellion, right? You have all these rebellions. You have all this instability, and then you have this rise of these liberalism principles of the individual, and then the fall of the monarch, and then religion pretty much like losing its weight. You have things something called half covenants. Remember, in New England, in order to become part of the government of the assembly of of the election of the General Assembly of Massachusetts, right, you have to be part of be part of the citizenry. That's rights in New England, right? You have to be a Puritan. You have to be part of the church, member of the church. Right? This is the Puritanism. This was why Roger Williams and Hutchison were exiled from Massachusetts because they were radical, right? They were not following the Puritan order. So you have that, and you have this halfway covenant of where, right, in the beginning, right, you have like these hardcore Puritans, but later on, as generations pass, their sons and daughters don't really are as fervent Puritans as their fathers were. And in order for them to maintain citizenship, to become members of the government and call the shots and stuff, right, you have to have like a conversion. You have to have like a vision, be Puritan. Now it's halfway. You didn't have to have like a full conversion. It's halfway covenant with God. So what I'm saying here is a secularization, right? It's becoming secularized society in Massachusetts, and that's really broad society among um, the people in Massachusetts, especially like the old school conservative ones, right? And you start to see here a schism between the urbanites, the urban sphere, and like the rural backcountry sphere in Salem or in Massachusetts. And let's use Salem as an example, right? So you have Salem Village, which is like farming, more rural, and then Salem Town. You got that going on, right? And you have all these things going on in the background, King Philip's War, and all these rebellions, Glorious Revolution, and then people still believe in magic and the supernatural, right? Not everybody's like John Locke, right? John Locke is barely becoming popular. These ideas of liberalism, ideas are becoming really popular. Most people still believe in fucking magic. So you have all these things coming at once here. So before the development of scientific explanation for everything, it was like God or something supernatural, right? Witches, devil, something like that, doing something bad for you or another. So in 1692, let's see, February 29, to be more exact, 1692, there's two guys, there's magistrates from Massachusetts government, John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwell. And they're sent to Salem to investigate some accusations of witchcraft. So that, and so what's going on is, right? So in 1692, the inhabitants of Massachusetts they're anxious, basically. There's no effective government right now, as in that year, right? There, what happened here is that the king had stepped in and to show to punish them, basically New Englanders, to becoming too independent and smuggling and avoiding the navigation acts. Right? Created the Dominion of New England and instituted this governor and Andros uh, to control New England and also these other colonies within the perimeter there of New England, and took away like the rights of New Englanders that were used to this from a long time, right? Salutary neglect. They were used to not being told what to do. So James II, right, is the one that does this. And so they don't have, there's no effective government of their own, right? There's no government really. There's like that transition from having like their own government to a king, to the kings direct. Uh, and then there's a war with the French Catholics in Canada at the same time as well. It's called William's War, King William's War. There's a war where also they're the Indian allies of these French Canadian guys, the Algonquians, Indians. This is in the northern and eastern frontiers. Uh, and there's like rumors that these French Canadians are recruiting African slaves, right? New Englanders, African slaves, into their ranks to invade New England. So there's that. So there's a lot of like tension going on there as well in New England. Um, and this tension here created more stress on the society of Massachusetts, um, and it just increased accusations against neighbors. And although man and woman were both brought as accused as witchcraft, as witches, almost 80% of those, it was 355 people who were accused of witchcraft here in Salem. 80% of those were women. And those that were actually put on trial, which was 103 of them, even a higher percentage of that, almost 90% of that, were women. And most of these women didn't have a husband or were widows or didn't have male heirs. They have sons. And they had property. And this is a place where land is scarce, right? Right now you have the French Canadians right above you, and their Indian allies, and then you have Indians to the west as well. And then all the land that is available right now is already claimed. So here comes all these new migrants here, men, mostly men, and they come here and there's no land, and then they see these old widows with land. Huh. Basically, this is what's happening here. So local land is scarce, and these old widows, right, happen to have land because their husbands died and they just left, and they don't have sons, right? And these are the ones really that are really targeted as witches, right? So that's some context, social, cultural context of the witchcraft trials here. Um, Additionally, that tight Puritan social order has been disrupted. I just talked about earlier. So land is scarce, right? This Puritan social order has been disrupted, and it's difficult for these young couples coming over to have a good start, to start out, right? To begin a new life. It's promised. So by the end of the 17th century, Englanders were more and more inclined than ever before to hold these women accountable for sin, why things are going bad for the colony. All things told, once the trials ended, 156 people were jailed and 20 were executed. Most of the accused were women past the age of 40, and most of the accusers were women in their late teens and 20s. Uh, Speed racer outside here. Anyways, many of these women who were accused were like the disagreeable right. Right, there were some were Quakers, some were Baptists, they were not Puritans, and some were dark-skinned women. Tituba is an example, who was like a servant, one of these of the accusers, the teenage girl, who said that her servant was the one that put the witchcraft on her and her friends, Tituba, and she came, she was practicing voodooism, basically. It was her own religion. The servant was practicing her own religion. And anyways, this okay. Uh, Also, very notably, I think very very important to note here about the witchcraft trials is that some of the accusers have been orphaned or have been recently displaced by the Indian Wars, such as like the King Phillip's War, right, Metacom. And what's most notable is that those people, these accusers, described these witches, right, these spirits, as quote unquote honey or the Indian color. So what I'm trying to get at here is that there's been some speculation, I guess, or some interpretation by some historians. Right, so here it is. More than half of the young women who leveled witchcraft accusations had lost one or both parents in the brutal Indian Wars. So it was basically what these historians are saying here in this interpretation is that maybe there was no witches at all, but it was like PTSD, this post-traumatic stress that these orphans had, right? Especially as they were hearing that Indians allied with the French were coming closer to their eastern border, right? So they were getting like these flashbacks, I guess, of being attacked, or of those Indian wars that just happened. Right, one of the biggest one was King Philip's War, that ravaged New England. So that's one interpretation of the witchcraft trials. Another one is that this was like um, servants and slaves brought in these foreign and alien religions that they were practicing in Africa or in the West Indies or whatever, voodooism and stuff with Tituba. Another interpretation that's kind of far-fetched, but I just put it out there because it's interesting, is that some of these girls, these teenage girls that were, I guess, possessed by these witches, had imbibed, had eaten magic mushrooms in the forest. They were tripping out. Anyways, um, my interpretation that I like to go for is that it was the social pressures, really, right? And it exploded on these witchcraft trials. Right? The lack of land, right? Impending Indian raids. We just recently got over these Indian wars, ravaged all these people here, and all these traumas that exploded on the so-called Salem witchcraft trials. All right. Finally, the way it ended is that the leading ministers of Boston were like, you know what, like fuck, it's getting out of hand. It got out of hand as soon as like a lot of the elite members started being involved as being accused as witches, right? So a lot of the elite's wives were beginning to be accused of witches, and we're like, no, hold up, that's getting too far now. It just snowballed. Um, and basically, they just adjourned the court. They're like, you know what? We're not going to talk about this no more. It's over, right? There's not some witches. And you see this as a transition from this like Puritan way of thinking. It's all about like God is the one that is in control, to more rational, enlightenment way of thinking, more rational understanding of nature, right? And by the 18th century, right, by 1700, so this happened in 1792, 1790, by 1798, by 1700s, by 1750s, and people were took pride on thinking rationally instead of thinking in religious terms. Right? So that's, I guess, one of the effects of the Salem witch trials is that sealed the fate of like this way of this mythical egg way of thinking, right? In myths and poems, right? The Bible, basically, right? Instead of thinking unscientific terms. And we're like, yeah, we gotta drop that shit. Right? Look at what happened to Salem witch trials. Let's think more rationally after this. And going along with this rationality, right, is that the power of the individual has the rational power. It's not based on the church, right, or on your beliefs, but the individuals have power now to rationally think through what's right and what's wrong. Right? So the seeds of individualism, right, which is a feature of America today, right? It's individualism. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps type of mentality. Right? Begins here, right? These are the seeds of individualism in America. So that's the Salem witch trials. All right, so now let's talk about a little bit of migration here. So not everybody was British that came during this time period, right? But when I talk about this, it may seem like it is, but it's not. There's a lot of variations, right? Irish people, Irish Scottish people, Germans, Africans, obviously slaves, right? So it's very diverse, right? To get that in your mind, that it is a diverse area here. The British colonies are a diverse set by this time period. By 1700, by the end of the century, right, 1775, it's a very diverse colonial societal life here. Diversity is pretty intense. So within 75 years, right, from 1700 to like 1775, right, it went from like being 90% English to very diverse population here. So let's talk about the first. Let's see, what should we talk about? So we have the Irish Scottish people that came here. They were Presbyterian. Then you have the Germans came here, and that added not only just religious diversity, but also ethnic diversity. So what would happen here is that a lot of these newcomers would go and settle in their own communities, and and so German language was, something that persevered. Still a lot of places, right, in Pennsylvania or throughout the U.S., have those strong old school German, roots. Let me see who else was here. So what else? The Germans tended to come with families. That's one thing that was unique about them. And in farming was their main thing. Pretty pretty successful for when they came with families and farms. Um, um, all right. So yeah, that's the main, like, I guess, waves of migration during this period. So the Irish Scots, Scottish, the Germans, and the Africans. The Africans were because of forced slavery, right? It's labor. Um, Also, you have because of this, you have a lot of stress against Native American land. Now you have all these newcomers. Where they're going to live? They're going to encroach increasingly onto Native American land. Land is the main thing. An example of this is the so-called walking purchase. So remember William Penn, right? In Pennsylvania. This happened in Pennsylvania, right? Where they were supposed to have harmonious relations with their Indian brethren. So in 1737, you have the so-called walking purchase. So this was a deal made by um, Lenni Lenape Indians. They agreed. Who was this guy? I forgot his name. Um, but it was Governor James Logan. There we go, James Logan. So the Lenni Lenape Indians agreed to an arrangement to have their own land to Governor James Logan of Pennsylvania at this time. And the treaty stipulated this, right? We'll sell you land, and you'll have a certain amount of time, like a day or two, and you walk. And how long you walk in that day, that's how much of land we're going to sell you. This was the Indians telling the governor. That's our deal, okay? And the governor was like, okay, sounds like a good deal. When the fucking governor, what he does is that he hires the best runners of the colony to relay and get as far as they can. Right? So the Indians were like, "Oh, walking, so many acres, right? Hell no, we're talking about now, like, thousands of acres because these guys had the best runners instead of walking. So that's a walking purchase, right? And this kind of shows like the swindle, the little the way we fucked over, basically, to excuse my French here, but the way we fucked over Native Americans for their land, right? We got these treaties, right, like the walking purchase, or straight up exterminated them, right, via Indian wars, right, for their land. Right? Land is key here. All right, so yeah, the walking purchase. All right, so yeah, again, back to diversity, right? Regional diversity. Right? We have a lot of diversity. Each colony basically has its own like character for this time period now, 1750s, 1775s. Right? You have distinct economic and social orders. You have like the small farms, the families. You have the urban cities, the port cities. Right? But mostly is all the economy basically is focused on the farming and agriculture. You have a whole bunch of farm families in the back country. So this is the area away from the coastal cities and into the west, but not west enough to Indian country. So Appalachian Mountains, right? The Proclamation Line of 1763, basically, and then in that area in between in the coastal, at the back country area. So this will be central Pennsylvania, present day central Pennsylvania, all the way south to the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, and into North and South Carolina, right? The area there. That's that back country there. So you have farm families, right? All these agricultural production, and then what they produce It was, I guess, centralized in these port cities that would ship out towards the West Indies, right? Wheat or food, whatever, meat, wheat, grains, to the West Indies to feed the slaves who were working there for the sugar plantations. Or they would ship raw goods, right? Whatever raw material they had. Furs was one of the main things that would also come from the mainland America into the port cities, Boston, Baltimore, right? Charleston, and then poof into the Atlantic economy. Right, that was kind of like the setup here that we have going on. And of course, in the north, you have like that family farming, especially in New England. In the middle colonies, you have more oriented. Again, these in the New England colonies, there was farming family that was like more for themselves, and then whatever extra they would sell into the market. In the middle colonies, like New York, Pennsylvania, it was more commercial. It was for commerce. It was what you grow for the market, and then you get money and you buy what you need. Right? And then in the southern colonies, the economy there was plantations, right? Slave labor, central slave societies, and this created pocket change, right, for people. And now you have what we call the consumer revolution. Right? So now you have goods, right? Luxury items you can buy, utensils, china, teapots, tea, and teapots. Right. Before this, right? Before this consumer revolution, right? Only the most elite people in colonial America had tea, access to tea. Now it was basically a necessity for everybody to have tea. Right. Um, so it wasn't really like consumerism, how we know it today, where you go to Walmart and you buy 10 copies of the same shit, right? But no, it was more like you have like you have just spending money right now. There's money to spend and buy stuff, and mostly you're buying British goods, right? Because here people in colonial America, they see themselves as British. There's not this American identity yet. America doesn't exist in their minds yet. Right? It's colonial America. Right? It's British America. They see themselves first and foremost as British. They're trying to emulate British uh, fashion and British mores and norms. And this is really mostly seen with the higher classes, with the elites. They have the money to import, for example, whatever British goods they want, right? Clothing, chairs, furniture, pianos, whatever, right? Um, so yeah, so right, there's these plantations. I mean, this economy, uh, especially in the plantation with these staple crops, right? Really, people really accumulated enormous amounts of wealth off the back of slaves, right? You have people like what is it, Robert Carter. He was a Speaker of the House of Burgesses. He had acquired 300,000 acres of land, 1,000 slaves by the time of his death, 1932. Uh, that's a lot of land. Uh, Basically, what happened here, right, along with this consumer revolution, what you see here is that by the 18th century, especially in Virginia here, talking about Virginia now, by 1770, the only way to be wealthy in Virginia is to have connections or to become to inherit your wealth. Um, so by 1770, nearly all of Virginia's upper class, uh, members had inherited their wealth. So this idea of like the self-made man, non-existent. And the reason why I exemplify Virginia is because we're gonna get like our first few presidents from Virginia, right? Thomas Jefferson, right? His son. I mean, he's a son of a chief of justice, just like George Washington. So these people come from big money, big fucking money, right? With slaves and plantations. Right? These are the founding fathers. Most of them, at least. Definitely all of them from the South have slaves. Right? So we're going towards there, right? Towards the American Revolution. Here we have a big, diverse colonial economy. We're still under control of Britain. We're starting to see these little pockets, right, of individualism, right, liberalism, right, of consumerism here. That is going to pretty much culminate in America becoming its own identity, its own, for better or for worse, its own nation state. All right. So this is the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4, we're going to go into slavery, more so into the slave trade, right? The transatlantic slave trade, uh, slave cultures, and slave restrictions. So, and then as well, chapter 4 also focuses on the so-called Great Awakening and more imperial battles between European empires and Native American empires for control of the continent that is now the U.S. All right, so thank you for listening to chapter 3. I know this is fucking long as hell, but some pretty good info that I think really illuminates the present world today. All right, y'all take care and see you next time.